Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this exciting webinar. A few things before we get started. Can you please keep your phones on mute during the presentation? You can do so by pressing star 6. There will be a Q&A session at the end of the webinar, but please feel free to type your questions in the chat box at the right-hand side of your screen throughout the presentation. And lastly, this webinar will be recorded, so watch out for an email from your enrollment advisor in the next week or so. Let's get started. Julie Naporalski is an instructor for the Kent State Master's Degree in Public Relations online program. She has 15 years of field experience in public relations and was most recently Public Relations and Social Media Account Director at Martino Flynn, a full-service advertising, public relations, and digital media agency based in Rochester, New York. Of Kent State University's School of Journalism and Mass Communication, Julie earned her Bachelor of Science degree in Public Relations. She received a Master of Science degree in Communications Management from Newhouse School of Public Communications at Syracuse University. Her capstone research explored the differences between the perceptions of organizational executives and practitioners on the practice of public relations. The study revealed the barriers and challenges that public relations function faces in becoming a recognized management science with a legitimate seat at the making table. Julie, as she reviews the Rice scandal in the context of modern crisis communication theory. She'll analyze the NFL's response, identify where the NFL went wrong, and discuss what it means for the PR function. Thank you.
Blakey, thank everybody for joining us today. Thanks for the nice introduction, Blakey. I'm an assistant professor in the PR program at Kent State. So if you decide to enroll in the program, then you and I certainly get to know each other pretty well. Mastering the art of crisis management is a must for any strategic practitioner, but also a very complicated topic. The crises, they happen quickly. The level of control that you have after a crisis ensues vary depending upon the situation. Now, you probably know already if you're currently practicing in the field. And probably know best practices in responding to a crisis, since communications is such a hot topic today. I want to show you today how you can use crisis communications theory to manage your way through a crisis, from the pre-crisis to the post-crisis phase. Program at Kent State, we offer a crisis communications course that's designed to give you a theoretical understanding of crisis management. That understanding combined with historical knowledge and a theoretical base to build from, you're getting significant skills that you can use in the field right away. So we're going to do a little bit of practice today, and I'll be using the NFL's crisis around the Ray Rice incident as an example of PR theory in action. Started here. To the discussion, I'll first provide a little bit of background on the Ray Rice case in the event that you aren't already familiar. Analyzing the NFL's response to the situation, including NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell's initial ruling of a 2-game suspension for Ray Rice to the ultimate indefinite suspension that took place 2 months later. We will discuss the press conference that Roger Goodell held back on September 19th explaining his actions. We'll the tactics employed by the NFL and discuss where I believe that the NFL went wrong. Provide some commentary on what I think this means for the function within the NFL. For example, when crises roll out of control, the new media and social media banter can be rather unforgiving of the PR function. But is PR really at fault here? That's something that we'll talk about. And I do want to note that this crisis is nowhere near complete. An investigation, as many of you may know, is taking place within the NFL right now. If that NFL investigation is complete, we'll have more answers. In fact, news reported yesterday that the NFL is going to be handing down a final judgment on Ray Rice in the next couple of days here. So things are still unfolding. Things may change once we learn the outcome of the investigation, but this will give us some good practice on how to apply crisis theories. So we'll keep moving here. With a quick review of the incident, and for sake of time, I'm going to highlight but note the issue is way more complicated than what's presented here. Back in February of this year, Baltimore Ravens running back Ray Rice and his fiance out after an argument in an elevator. The incident was caught on video, and it was reported to the Ravens at that time. Rice and his fiance were arrested. Rice with assault, but he was pleaded out in local court because with the he would undergo some counseling. However, by the time that happened, the first video that many of you probably saw, Ray Rice dragging his unconscious fiance at the elevator, had been released. March of 2014, the Atlantic County grand jury indicted Rice on felony aggravated assault, which had a 5-year prison term attached to it, so the stakes got a little bit higher. He had hired a good lawyer and was able to plead the charge by entering a diversionary program, which is designed for first-time offenders. If Rice makes it this program, then the charges against him will be dropped. Now, up to this point, the NFL and the Ravens have remained very silent. Instead, they've been dealing with the issue pretty quietly. In May, however, Rice and his wife held a press conference that was hosted by the Baltimore Ravens. There were no more executives or media relations staff supporting Rice. One of the news conference was for Rice to apologize for letting the public down. Now, this event interested violent experts and others because the Ravens had Rice's wife, they had since been married, sitting right next to her, a beer. Rice and his wife met with NFL and Roger Goodell over the summer. So this is around July. Issued his 2-game suspension to Rice. Now, this was what Rice was expecting. Of course, they had not seen the surveillance video from inside the elevator. Nonetheless, the announcement came with significant criticism and judgment. The public thought this was just far too lenient. So what happened after that? For example, M&T Bank, which Rice is the face of its marketing campaign, they dropped him. And women's rights advocates and domestic violence experts started criticizing the NFL heavily for its leniency in that decision. Yes, Goodell announced a change to the league's personal conduct policy. At this point, now any player involved in domestic violence would receive a mandatory 6-game suspension. Goodell said that he had gotten it wrong. Then in early September, the other shoe dropped. This the TMZ video of Ray Rice's left hook to his then fiance's face was every television screen, Facebook feed, and Twitter feed across the country. And immediately, Rice was released from the Ravens and suspended indefinitely by the NFL. Ravens and the NFL claimed that they hadn't seen the TMZ video prior to its release to the public, and that remains in contention today and is part of the investigation. But following the release of Ray Rice, Roger Goodell did host a press conference to discuss the situation. So we'll take that more closely next. In this communications course, we many current crisis cases in the context of crisis communications theory. This is to help our students understand how the application of theory can be effective in your everyday practice. Let's take a look at the Roger Goodell press conference from September 19th for a minute. Now, the all got it right this day. Roger Goodell was highly prepared for this news conference. His notes were spot on. He focused, he spoke clearly with authenticity, and the strategy that the NFL took with this press conference also clearly aligns with crisis theory. To be more specific, it aligns clearly with Benoit's image repair theory. Image theory is a theory that applies when an organization's stakeholders perceive something bad has happened and hold the organization responsible for that negative action. So, for argument, that's what happened here. The Ray Rice incident was a terrible incident, and NFL fans are holding the NFL responsible for taking severe enough action against it. Now, NFL's response aligns with image repair theory's concept of mortification. To this mortification, you have to admit guilt, express concern, ask forgiveness, then report the corrective actions that you'll take to prevent a similar crisis in the future. Walk through the statement here, and we'll see where image repair theory aligns. In a statement, he said that we too much of the NFL doing wrong. That's with me. Sorry for that. He did it wrong on a number of levels, but we'll do whatever it takes to get it right. Here he is, admitting guilt and expressing concern. He had clear points for corrective action. There's an independent investigation on the process. He said we will get our house in order first. He and members of the league would be participating in training, education programs related to domestic violence and sexual assault. He had a partnership with the National Domestic Violence Hotline and National Sexual Violence Resource Center. He announced changes to personal conduct policy. He wasn't very specific about that, but he said nothing is off the table. And they established very clear and transparent rules for everybody, and that's going to be completed by the Super Bowl. Also created a conduct committee that's going to review cases like this in the future. And the Harris theory states that you take these actions with the primary goal of defending the organization's reputation or working to repair it. So this is the case for the NFL. They find themselves in a bind with their response to the Rice incident. Did it take steps to make sure that they were repairing their reputation with their publics? And in this conference, they've done it very well. So the NFL got this press conference so right from a theoretical perspective that he's so highly criticized following the press conference. Because the recipe was all there, but the end still failed to resolve this issue with the public. So let's dig a little bit deeper to find out why that is. So the NFL wasn't prepared for. Today, angry stakeholders are more likely to generate crises for organizations. Consumers, community groups, activists are becoming more vocal toward organizations when they are unhappy. And as you probably can guess, they're using social channels to express that anger. Maybe you've done it yourself once or twice. The danger comes into play because these angry stakeholders, they have the ability to create their own content. They want to say not just through social media, but essentially through the news media as well today. Because media often turns to social channels to pick up consumer reaction to big news stories. How many times have you seen on the nightly news, the post of that tweet of somebody reacting to something going on? So social media and mainstream media continue to collide. These holders are turning into activists by using their voice to essentially organize and pressure organizations to change their behavior. And this is part of a phenomenon known as the groundswell. Now, science occurs online, but this issue is huge and so widely covered by the news media that mainstream media has only increased the power of the groundswell taking place. After Goodell issued that 2-game suspension to Rice, Twitter's in an uproar. There was Merriweather got a 2-game suspension for hitting 2 grown men in helmets that were defenseless. And Rice got 2 games for being a defenseless woman. So is this one the message to my wife and 3 daughters today? The business has been such a big part of our lives, referring to the NFL, doesn't care about you at all. And I answer that one a little bit. Stakeholder activism turns into a groundswell of activity. It's hard to ignore as an organization. Users are essentially telling you what you need to do to make it right with them. And how do you ignore that? And then for the NFL, the stakes got a little bit higher. The NFL may not have been listening to its stakeholders, but its sponsors certainly were. Brands like Pepsi and Anheuser-Busch, these are huge brands that take the time to listen to their customers. They've invested millions, if not billions of dollars over time to protect their relationships with their consumers and to establish reputations of their own that include strong morals. And Anheuser-Busch actually upped the ante of the groundswell by aligning with their own stakeholders, rightfully so, and condemning the NFL's actions. Stakeholder activism with the groundswell, and then you throw on top of it brands that listen to their customers, it's a recipe for disaster for an organization like the NFL that conceivably didn't have a set of guiding principles in place beforehand to avoid a situation like this. The issue the NFL came down to an issue of planning. Planners in 4 phases. The action phase is the phase when PR managers detect warning signs and then they take actions to prevent a crisis. Preparation is when an organization creates a crisis management plan. You're diagnosing your crisis vulnerabilities, your media training, your spokespeople, your education system in place, etc. This is the most commonly known phase of crisis planning. Response is when you actually apply those preparation components to a crisis. So this is when a crisis actually occurs and you put your plan into action. Reason is the final stage of planning. This is when you evaluate the crisis after it's over and you learn from it. Changes to your plan, you identify areas to prevent the crisis from occurring again in the future. So let's look at these phases in the NFL. This isn't over, so we can't expect the NFL to have learned from it completely yet, so it's a matter of revision. Talked about in the Goodell press conference, the South was right on target. They did that day, that was exactly where they should be. So from a perspective, probably not so much. And with preparation, that one is hard to judge. The preparation phase is largely unseen. You're getting a plan, you're getting for a crisis. It's process-oriented, so you would hope that the NFL has some procedures in place, but it's hard to know that without deep knowledge in the NFL is talking right now. So that's with prevention. The NFL have prevented this crisis in the first place. I think so. This is where the NFL got it very, very wrong. The warning signs were there. This is not the first time an NFL player has been involved in domestic violence. Had the NFL done a better job in its crisis planning, I could have and would have handled this situation very differently. So one issue that we cover in our crisis communications course is the importance of crisis prevention. We talk a system known as a crisis sensing mechanism, a very technical term. But this is where PR practitioners are scanning and monitoring for crisis warning signals. For the warning of a crisis, they're acting on those signals as it's needed. Steps that you can take when trying to prevent a crisis. The first is to conduct environmental scanning. This is the environment around you for changes. You're looking at trends, events, even social, political or health issues, and then engage in management. So environmental scanning is looking outside your organization. Risk is when you're looking inside your organization. You're looking holistically to determine those areas where you feel that you're the most vulnerable. This is an area where perhaps the NFL should have taken more care. With the history of players involved in legal issues from sexual assault and abuse, previous cases of domestic violence, to name just a few of them, the NFL should have had this issue high on its radar screen and been better prepared for how to deal with an issue like this. This certainly was a warning signal. The next step is collecting information. That's the NFL had identified domestic violence as a risk factor for the organization. Next, the NFL would engage in research. They're conducting a content analysis of news stories and social media conversations occurring about NFL players involved in domestic violence. In addition, they'd be conducting surveys, interviews, focus groups with stakeholders to get their understanding of what NFL fans think of the issue of domestic violence. Tolerable or intolerable are they of domestic violence occurring in the NFL? They need to have a very understanding of what that is. The information is the next step. And this is where you're going to learn from your research. The information you collected does suggest a possible crisis. If you do the research you collect implies a pending crisis, then you develop an action plan to avoid it. You head on, you change policies, you take proactive measures to avoid it, the issue becoming a crisis. And then after that, you evaluate whether or not your actions have been effective. You do that through some more research. So back to the NFL. Knowing that domestic violence is an issue that has plagued the NFL before, the NFL should have taken what it learned from its research and proactively changed its policies against players engaged in domestic violence situations. Making calls such as, a mandatory 6-game suspension that Goodell announced, that have been made well before any case of domestic violence occurred. That policy been in place before the Ray Rice incident, far less speculation around the league's decision. There's less criticism over the league's actions or inactions. So, the incident would have caught headlines, and it should have. But I had the opportunity to avoid being positioned as the bad guy in this situation. You mentioned before, this crisis is nowhere near complete. So, what we learn from the investigation, we'll be able to better analyze what went wrong. But let's bring to light another issue that we discuss in our program. That's the role of public relations within an organization. Now, in the ideal world, the public relations function is viewed strategically. It means that senior management rely on public relations to provide counsel on both communications and ethical issues. So you wonder just a little about the role that PR played in this crisis. Was PR called to the table immediately or left out in the cold until the situation exploded and then brought in to fix everything? Ethical decisions were taking place within the organization without the help of PR counsel. For example, the NFL claims that they asked for the elevator surveillance tape repeatedly, but they never received it. Try hard enough. They actually have it. Hopefully these are questions that will be answered in the investigation. The bottom line is that in any crisis, the role of the PR practitioner is critical. And the inherent lack of proper crisis plan in NFL's case, it's the question of whether or not the PR function within the NFL had the engagement that it needed to help the organization avoid this crisis. I hope that I've been able to give you, a small peek inside some of the issues that we cover in the PR Online program and how we go about it at Kent State. That's my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions that you have.
Julie, I do have a few questions that were asked. So it's, as you mentioned during your presentation, there has been a long history of legal issues in the NFL. Why do you think that the Ray Rice situation has been blown up the way it has?
Well, I think that from my research on this topic, the Ray Rice incident has been, it's an issue of the groundswell. So what I spoke about earlier, indecision by the league was one of the first mistakes that were made. And then from there, it was the flip-flopping decisions. It was the 2-game suspension that went to the 6-game suspension. It was no action. It was from the Rams taking no action to release Ray Rice. There was so much indecision going on throughout the process that it was a mess for the NFL. So when you don't respond in a consistent manner, you're going to receive some pretty heavy criticism. So that's one factor. Also, domestic violence is a very heated issue. In this case, domestic violence groups and duty groups were turned into activists, or filled their role as activists, I should say, and we brought the heat on the NFL. So it was a combination of poor planning and the powerful activist groups in this situation that I believe made it heat up so bad.
Okay, the next question. With Ray's wife supporting her husband, how does this impact the crisis for the NFL?
I don't answer that question in my opinion perspective. I think that Ray Rice supporting his wife, Ray Rice's wife supporting him throughout this, I don't think that it necessarily hurts the NFL, to be honest with you. I think that supporting her husband is is a more of a character perspective for Ray Rice. Now, Ray Rice, one of the things that I didn't talk about was this was tough for the Baltimore area, because Ray Rice is a very respected individual, especially in his community. He gives a lot to his community. He's very involved, gives back. So for this to happen to him is a huge attack to his character. So his wife standing by his side is helping his character. I'm not necessarily sure that that's going to help the NFL per se, but it certainly can help Ray Rice as they continue to repair the damage that was done.
The next question: If you had been consulting with Roger Goodell in the beginning, what advice would you give him?
If I had been consulting with Roger from the beginning of this crisis, the very first question I would have asked him is, what type of what type of research and preparation do you have as it relates to domestic violence? So, as soon as the incident occurred, this would have been the type of thing where we would have engaged in some pretty significant research to understand exactly how this would affect the organization, and then taken the steps to make changes. Now, on this, I think the very first thing that we would have done differently is that we would have immediately and proactively to this situation. So the news media reported the incident occurred, and that's when Roger Goodell should have started planning his changes on domestic violence or personal conduct as a whole. He got trained in personal conduct far too late in the game as it relates to the Ray Rice incident.
Thank you. Okay, the next question. Do you believe the NFL also might benefit from these kinds of headlines in the news, ethical or not?
Well, there's that old saying, there's nothing as bad press, and I believe that today that there is, especially given the effect that media can have on a brand's reputation, because the press that takes place is extended to the conversations that take place in the press are extended onto social media, and that can be damaging overall. Now, unfortunately, we're dealing with a powerhouse like the NFL, and if you may have seen it yourself, some of the initial research shows that people aren't watching, people haven't stopped watching football because of this incident. I don't expect that they would. So I really think that this will benefit the NFL. I think that they have the opportunity to take a situation that's been bad for them and turn it into something good. I think that they're working toward that. The challenge with that is that, it's not always viewed. So it's almost as if, the NFL has been forced into this role of aligning with domestic violence groups and looking at, women's rights groups more carefully. They've ignored, about 50% of their consumer base and their fan base in the past. And now they're in a position where they have to start working towards aligning better with this group. So, I think on the long term, this could help the NFL improve its relationship with its female audiences. And just unfortunately, to take hard road to get there to that understanding that their female audience is a very prolific part of their consumer base.
Okay, with the next question, wouldn't the PR aspect be better handled at the Ravens team level versus the commissioner level?
Ravens have problems of their own. So I don't necessarily think, I think because, Ray Rice is part of the NFL, he's an employee of the NFL, or they're part of the NFL, that's where the governing body of NFL teams have to get it right. So, I thought Roger Goodell had a great line that he said that being part of the NFL is a privilege. And that's, that's something that he needs to hold on to, and that has to be dictated across all of the teams, the behavior of all of our players. Now, there's the state system versus the federal court system. The NFL is the federal body of football in our country. So I do think this is an NFL issue. The Ravens themselves have dealt with it perhaps based on all that we've read and hopefully what we'll find out, that Vince certainly should have communicated better with the NFL. I mean, it definitely would have started with the Ravens, but this is a holistic NFL issue for sure.
Okay, thank you, Julie. It looks like those are all the questions we have for today. So I just wanted to thank you so much for the great presentation. And if there are any questions about the presentation or the program in general, please reach out to your enrollment advisor. And for those of you who are considering starting the online public relations program in the upcoming start term, the application deadline to all your documents sent in is November 14th. So please get in touch with Twana Lewis as soon as you can, and she will help you meet that deadline. I want to thank everybody for joining us, and thank you again, Julie, for the great session.
Well, thank you.